Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. My name is Gary Arndt. As usual, is brewer extraordinaire Bobby Fleshman, who's with me, and of course, once again, Joel Hermansen, the sage of suds, the historian of hops, the bon vivant of beer tending. We've been talking about IPA the last few episodes, and we've talked about its history, how it started with ships going to India. We talked about how it developed into its modern format with the legalization of home brewing. Small craft brewers in the West Coast then adopted this, became popular. But since then, it's adopted many different formats. And Bob, you noted in our first episode in this series that there just isn't a IPA. There's lots of different IPAs. Right. And so what we want to do in this episode is kind of cover as much as we can the spectrum or the diversity of IPAs that are out there. Why don't we start with the double IPA? Is it an
work from the back historically?
Is it an India Pale Ale?
Right. Oh my God. That's become a little bit of a debated topic. What's the difference between a double IPA, an IPA, and an Imperial IPA? I've heard this discussion. I guess I would probably put the Imperial as one that's more focused on taking an otherwise IPA recipe, but doubling the malt, not adjusting the hops. And that's more of a bridge to what I would call a barley wine. You'll see like Bigfoot might be made that way. Bigfoot's a famous beer by a barley wine or a triple IPA made by Sierra Nevada. So what do we want to say about double IPA? The other way I can take that's the Imperial IPA. The double IPA is where you scale both of those factors up. You're definitely putting on double the hops, double the malt, but it's not just a matter of times two. You're trying to achieve and maintain balance throughout. I heard someone talk about low alcohol beers once, and I'll never forget it. They said no matter what you're making, you want the end product to have this mouthfeel. And that may seem obvious at first, but then how do you accomplish that is where the devil gets into the details. So a double IPA is going to be something like Pliny the Elder. It's going to have that
547.
547.
As the official demand coordinator of 547, right. I had to insist that be mentioned.
Yes, exactly. So and it's pretty dry, honestly. It has body because it has a lot of alcohol. And it's got enough of the hop tannins, which give it structure. This is a trick from the winemaker's playbook. And yeah, so that would be, and then if you're talking about American double IPA, you're definitely talking about Aromas. So there's going to be a lot of dry hopping. You're going to get a lot of that coming out. That's going to be maybe your first quote sip. Well, seeing it is your first sip, and then smelling it is your second sip, metaphorically.
Can I pivot to that for a second? Because when you smell a great double IPA, Pliny the Elder comes to mind. 547 is another one that obviously is in that same category of beer. That beer smell, like when you pour it, it just envelops your head. Do you remember when we did that experiment with the glass and it enveloped your head?
I don't know if head enveloping would really be the description I would use, but yeah, there's definitely there's a distinct scent that comes from it. I've always described it as orange peel.
Yeah.
That's very pronounced, probably more than in any other beer that I've had here.
And, I think one of the reasons that people that gravitate to IPAs, that they gravitate to the double IPA as a style is that, and I forget the exact percentage, I believe it's 70% of our taste is what we smell.
I believe that, yeah.
And when you put your nose over a 547, a Pliny the Elder, a Bell's Two-Hearted Ale, et cetera, these great, high ABV IPAs, it's unmistakable. It just consumes the oxygen in the room.
And I think alcohol, this is me just having a semi-light bulb moment, the alcohol is helping dissolve and disperse those aroma compounds into the liquid. So, and that's giving you more as it continues to bubble in your glass. It's releasing as you go through that pint.
Is that why they recommend that IPAs be consumed in the tulip-shaped glasses with the thing?
I've seen Sam Adams has a patent on one of those, I think. Yeah. I've seen a few of those out there. I can't speak too much to that. I assume the idea is that it's coaxing out more agitation and more nucleation of the CO2. But I also know how marketing works. So
Right.
it's a little column A and B.
All right. Next one that's become very popular is the Hazy IPA.
Which is, I think at this point, in and of itself, it's probably 51%. I'm saying 51 because I know it's more than half. But I don't think it's a lot more than half. It's right around that 50+% of the entire IPA market. And
Really?
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that.
Well, you're standing in Mick Fleshman's tap room, and we acknowledge it as a style, but we did not throw the baby out with the bathwater and just get rid of everything else. A lot of brewers have, not so much in Wisconsin, but on the East Coast, you're going to see that. Even on the West Coast, honestly, there's a lot of brewers that have decided to become mostly hazies, and where you'll see everyone is going to be fruited or not, and they swap the hop out on it. I'm not saying there aren't good ones out there. I think it's a style in and of its own, and there are great examples out there. There are terrible examples out there. But at this point, it's become a bridge from people who don't like beer but do like juice. And that's why juicy is considered the leading attribute. Pillow, I've heard that, pillow, mouthfeel. And so it's easy for them to segue. And it's easy to get those people sold on coming back to that tap room the next time and the next time and the next time. The problem that I see with hazies at this point, I acknowledge it's a style here to stay like all the others. But the problem that I have is I'm not certain how much people transition into what I would call beer-flavored beer away from it. And I don't mean to piss on the style when I say that. But because it's its own style, it's new, and people say it's not beer. Well, everything, quote, wasn't beer at some point, I think. And in any case, this whole style conversation is kind of gray anyway, because there's not well-defined lines when it comes to that, to styles in the beer world. But I'm not sure how much people move over once they get into hazies.
Do you know the history of this, or when it kind of came about, and what was the fruit that's initially used?
Well,
before we do that, can I add, from a brewing perspective, so you add oats and wheat to it, which grants it that haze.
Yeah, and body. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what, because, for example, we have IPAs here, hazy IPAs here that are fruited.
Yeah.
But we also have the style in which we just rely on the esters from the yeast to produce those fruit notes. Can you talk a little bit about what maybe the difference between those
fruited
two?
and fruit suggestive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great fruit suggestive.
So there's that open up a lot. So you're right. There's a few places you can get fruit flavors. You can actually get it from the malt itself, at least the precursor itself. When combined with a certain kind of yeast, it can release a lot of fruity flavors. The yeast can take any old neutral substrate of sugar and convert it, depending on which yeast. The most famous one was your Weizen yeast, which makes a banana flavor, and people will taste their Hefeweizens and they'll think that you put banana in there, and it came entirely from the yeast that's involved. Belgian beers often have Brettanomyces or different bacteria, and those produce acids and esters, and they give you suggestion of fruit. You can just toss fruit in. And when I say just toss, that actually is its own, again, another full episode, because what do you mean? Do you just take a whole fruit and toss it in? Do you seed it first? Do you puree it? Do you concentrate it? Do you let it ferment out? Do you throw it in the boil? It just goes on and on how you want to manipulate that fruit. I think when it comes to hazies, the best way to do it is get a quality, unadulterated fruit that's literally just pureed. And then you just put it in a finished product. You stabilize your finished product, combine it. And that's what people want. People want they want to elevate, amplify the otherwise fruity attributes of that style and that softness of that style. Again, I struggle with it. So what we do when we make one called Alter Ego, and I use a hop called Nelson Sauvin, and it, like Sauvignon Blanc or Sauvignon Blanc grapes from New Zealand, it carries with it these thiols. These thiols give you some fruity character, but reminiscent of wines, reminiscent of something drier, something more complex. So once in a while, I catch myself actually drinking a glass of Alter Ego. I say that because I'm always preoccupied by our other beers, but I'll grab one and I'll read right into it, and I'm tasting some of these notes, and it is inspiring as a brewer to play in that sandbox. I won't lie. I like to look for our own signature flavors when it comes to all the beers we make, including the Hazy IPA. But,
So I had asked you in the previous episode, you mentioned the 51%. When do you think the hazy fever will break? Or is that
it's finally leveled, I think. I think at this point it's leveled. It's what people drink. One of if they're an everything drinker, they'll drink one of those a week maybe when they come in here. And if they're only going to drink that, well, that's what they're going to drink every day. But I'm a little concerned about that, though. The people that are just drinking hazies, I'm a little concerned that's not doing the industry any good. So we try to limit the number of offerings. Not try to. We just inadvertently only have enough time to make so many beers, and I'm not going to commit myself to 10 versions on the same idea.
But you also make a blazy.
Yeah, that's
and
one.
Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
a lazy, a crazy?
So
and I wasn't stuttering there. That's actually has 3 C's.
I have. We call this beer Alter Ego, and again, it's built with these bones that suggest coconut and pineapple and mango, and it's got all these components in it. And so why not amplify? And that's where all these different fruited variations on that came from. So just so people know that are listening out there, we're known for all these traditional ones. I think the thing I want them to take away is that we don't just throw a style or beer at the wall just to check a box. This keeps me up at night, just like all the rest of the beers, and all the intent is in place so that we made this family of beers from the beginning that was meant to be fruited. And I think every time we did it, we pulled a different one of those flavors out of that beer. Yes, and that's called Alter Ego, and that's very intentionally named because it's well outside of our brand, but it's everything the market wants.
Now, a beer that's in your brand, and I know you love to talk about this beer. Can you talk a little bit about the Stepchild? Because I think I'm one of many around the McFleshman's universe who are waiting anxiously.
The MCU, the McFleshman Cinematic Universe.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah, that may be a thing. Maybe we need apparel for that.
That's really good.
That is really good. First of all, I think I'll ask the question, for everyone out there, when will we see Stepchild again? And then for those maybe who are out of our range, can you talk a little bit about Stepchild, because it's kind of a remarkable thing.
So Stepchild was born out of a 547 brew day. We were brewing 547, our double West Coast IPA. And not until the lautering process, that is the stage in brewing where you start to run the wort out of the grain and into the kettle, did we realize what we were creating was not the color of 547. It was red. And I started pulling the bags of malt, or the bags that held the malt, back out of the garbage to figure out what had happened. Did we toss in the wrong ingredient? And no, I actually got on the phone with the plant manager over at Breese Malting, and I said, hey, I don't know what's going on. I gave him the lot number, and we were mid brewing. He was on speed dial. He was able to be reached at that moment. And I said, I don't know. And he says, oh yeah, I think we ran some black patent malt before we milled yours, which is the darkest grain you can have. So it only takes like a few ounces that you can turn a beer red. I'm like, oh my God. So then I hung up the phone. He said, you just dump it, we'll pay you for it. And I said, well, let me riff on this for a second. I'll think on this for a second. So I was running it off, and I was able to grab a little more caramel malt off the shelf, because I'd already decided, okay, this is not 547, so what can we do? And for those of you who don't know, you can actually take a little bit of caramel malt or some of these roasted malts. You can throw them in the lauter. You don't have to let them sit. They're just dissolving, and they're adding the flavors and colors. They're not part of the enzymatic process that gives you the fermentable sugars. They're my spices. So I went and I grabbed, it was actually some kiln malts. I'm not sure I used any caramel malts. And I was able to get those into the lauter. I knew I was going to make a new beer. And I knew at that time conceptually what a red IPA was. I never had written one, but I knew what I wanted to pull out of it. A little Munich malt character was thrown in there, a little toastiness. And then I thought, okay, all right, how do we steer this car right? And so we had some New Zealand hops, which give you some pronounced tropical aromas, different than the citrus aromas you get from 547. And we were able to construct on the fly in 30 minutes this new beer. And it came out, and it was a wild hit. And Alex Schultz named it, made a great label. It was called Stepchild of 547, Redheaded. Wild success, this beer. And they asked, when are you going to make this again? And I said, I'm not totally certain what's in this because no one was actually 100% certain what had gone wrong over at the other plant. So we then actually did remake it, and we did make some assumptions, and it again was a wild success. Even after the first time we released it, said get it once and they're going to happen again. And then next time we said this is the last time, for the second time that it's never going to happen again. So it was the running joke, and then we did it a third time, and we're nearing our fourth time, but we've had a couple years off, so there's a lot of demand for that beer to come back.
So
now.
There is.
Yeah.
I've actually I've never had it. It's never lined up for me, and
Yeah.
I am excited about the day that happens.
So could we define this as a new style of IPA?
Well, no, they actually make red IPAs on the West Coast. I'm not sure how many doubles you're going to see out there, but yeah, we could. Everybody could
It's
continue.
marketing.
You can just continue to slice that pie a little thinner. Yeah.
Do you find that a lot of brewing successes that you've had come out of happenstance like that?
Oh, well, yeah. Another one's our Dark Note, which is our Dunkelweizen. I was sitting in the room we're in now during an operations meeting, and we were doing a collaboration with Habitat for Humanity, and we had to get a beer in the tank that week. And I had this meeting and I had another meeting, and as someone was talking in the meeting, I just grabbed a Post-it and wrote it down. And it's like writing songs where you can spend 5 minutes or 18 years. And here was my 5-minute version, and I handed it off to our then lead brewer and I say, hey, let's get this thing off the ground and become a wild success. And it took 5 minutes to make that. And
Right.
I think that it's a good point where you don't want to overthink it. Sometimes what you do on that Post-it is, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's what you do downstream to it and with it. But yeah.
Interesting. You brew Dark Note every fall, but I've yet to see Stepchild.
Stepchild was never planned. And I think that speaks to all these things about its name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we were recording, you guys talked about black IPAs.
Yeah, which is a black IP pale ale. So there's so much contention in the beer industry. A black IPA, in my mind, is more like an American porter than it is anything else, which is a hoppy porter, hoppy drier porter. That said, I've heard Cascadian Dark Ale, which is a nice name, American Dark Ale. There's various other names that have been ascribed to it. I think it's a worthy style, whatever we call it. I do think there is a tiny little wedge in between even what I would call an American porter and a pale ale or an IPA.
Have you made one here?
I never made one here. I made them as home brewer, and I still taste it in my mind. I think that it's worth going back to. I think the market's kind of coming back to that now. Yeah, they're fun beer, but it just kind of speaks to how far can you go with the IPA acronym, post-nominal, whatever you want to call it. You can put IPA all and everything on the menu, and then you're going to give your customer a hard time deciding, because generally they get a little antsy, a little nervous when they walk up to the board, but when they see IPA, okay, yeah, I'll take an IPA. But if you call everything a brown IPA, an English IPA, a double IPA, West Coast, then you're going to give them a little anxiety because now they don't know what to choose again because that was their cushion. It just become this whole thing where everything's called an IPA, and they don't have to have bitterness. They don't even necessarily have to have aroma, but it's an easy way to move a beer. So a lot of people brew a quote all IPAs. And subsequently, the Brewers Association has something like 17, 18 different styles of IPA that they award. And all the other organizations do the same thing. Anyway, we like IPAs, and market sneaks in.
And we have a new one here, which is, I think, dare I say, just a regular IPA, if there is such a thing, categorically speaking. It's a beer I know that you are very excited about, and that is the Little Tornado.
Very excited. I caught myself. This is more like a 547 retooled, removed some alcohol, took some of the ingredients and rearranged them so I could express some of the other ones that I had been wanting to express in 547, but I couldn't because it's now a laminated recipe. Joel will be happy to hear that. We're not going to fuck with 547.
No, there would be There would be great trauma.
It has a
if that
day
happened.
named after it.
Thank
And
you
what-
for making this podcast explicit now.
Oh, was it not already?
Yeah. Probably.
I think it was. Yeah. Yeah. So once it has a day, May 47th, named after it,
You can't mess with it.
you can't mess with it.
No.
So anyway, I wanted to retool it. I've been wanting to for a while, and I couldn't figure out a way to. And then eventually, all of us turning 50 around here, we all decided we can't have this 9% or like 2 or 3 or more I've seen in a night. And so I kept getting the asks, not just from our age group, but even the younger group. We need something that's not this alcoholic. It's like, great, this is my opportunity. So I took it and was able to go back to the drawing board and create a 2024 version of a West Coast IPA. And I could not be happier with it. There's a couple of small knobs that I'm still turning to pull out some of the attributes that I want to see just a little bit more of.
So it's not laminated yet?
It's not quite there, but it's really close because I caught myself drinking one a couple days ago thinking, don't touch this thing. This is absolutely perfect. So I don't know. It's just some small tweaks, but that one also stressed me out a lot. I'd been putting it off for a while for other reasons, not just because the market didn't exist for it, but because, actually it's related to that. Because as the market started to exist, I didn't want to let it down. The 547 community was asking for it, and I did not want to make a beer that was so lesser of its inspiration.
Well, and I think, I don't know if this is one of the 19 categories as granted by the handed down from the mountain. of the
Exactly.
Homebrewer
There's tablets.
Association.
Yeah.
But I know I'd be walking a dangerous line if I didn't mention this for Christoph's sake. You and I, this is maybe our current favorite beer right now. I'm going to bring it up.
I'm drinking a lot. I know where you're going.
That is the rye IPA. We make a rye IPA over here that is
That one
gold.
is.
It is gold.
That one is a sleeper, and
I love that beer.
It is a full on West Coast style, and I brewed it with Stefano that owns 3 restaurants. I forget his full name, but he's Italian. He's actually American, but his family's Italian, and he built 3 Italian restaurants in Sheboygan. And he loves 547, and we're all getting older, and he says, "Can you make me a beer, not only just for me, but for my restaurant?" And I like West Coast, and I need it not to be this alcoholic, and I need it to include the Meadowlark rye grown it's a mill in Madison that works only in organic ingredients, and it's raw. And I'm thinking, oh Jesus, this is going to be a lot of work, because working with raw rye is a beast. And we figured it out, and we could talk about how you make a rye beer, but at the end of the day, I could not be happier. It's dry. I got to play with new hops again that I haven't been able to play with before. I got to work with rye spiciness as its own ingredient. And I'm thinking about it right now. I think I'm going to get one. So that's another category, rye IPA.
Well, and it's not a real obscure category either.
Not terribly obscure.
Sierra Nevada has the Ruthless Rye, and I've seen a number on the shelves, so I don't know.
But it's hard for here, because now we got 547 Tornado. It's kind of up to the beer tender, Joel, and the rest to introduce people to it, because it kind of sneaks under the radar. It also doesn't go on tap a ton of the time because we're selling a lot of it in the Sheboygan market. If listeners that are from wherever they are, Sheboygan is about an hour and a half away from here on Lake Michigan.
Town.
Yeah, it's about
Great
straight east of here.
Let's close by talking about one of the beers that's occasionally on the menu here. I've had it a few times. I actually kind of like it. It's your Ultima IPA.
Yeah.
Which is a dry,
Yeah.
we call it a brute IPA. And it tastes very different.
Yeah, I was going to throw it in the mud a minute ago when I was talking about how we just call everything an IPA no matter how much hops are in it. Yeah.
I mean, if you served it to me, I wouldn't call it an IPA necessarily.
Right.
But explain what's behind
it's another West Coast style. You can see there's a theme here. I love the idea, and I love the beer of brute. I think making something that's, quote, champagne-esque is another way to drag people over from the wine world or the non-beer world. But in this case, it's a perfect bridge. Like it's like a beer that if you like champagne, you can play in that sand. It's got the esters that you'll see in a champagne. And again, not to piss on the the hazy thing, but it's hard to see where hazy gets you into other styles. Ultima, though, is a brut IPA. Brut IPAs, for those that don't know, are meant to be brewed in such a way they come out around 7% alcohol, so the middle of the road on the ABV, but they're meant to be brewed absolutely bone dry. So we use enzymes from fungus that are found in nature, and that enzyme breaks down all of your complex, your di and tri molecules that are more than just one maltose unit or whatever. They break everything down into small bites that the yeast can consume and turn directly into alcohol. They leave nothing behind. And the idea and the trick behind making a beer like that is take everything you know about IPAs and start over. You throw it away and start over, because you're not going to need very many hops. You don't need any more than we put into our light lager. Well, our Helles lager. In fact, that might even be pushing it, because you're removing any cushion. So whatever is left in there in terms of hop intensity will be on full display. And then you focus on the aromatics. We do put a decent amount of dry hops on that beer. But what makes that beer really cool is we take Wisconsin-grown grapes, we do Marquette and Edelweiss, and we make our own wines. And then we blend that at a certain percentage into Ultima, make a rosé and a blanc. And those are extremely popular. And again, yet another way to get people into beer. We're actually making it right now. It's funny you say that. It's harvest season. We've got our grapes. We've already got our wines in the fermenters. And they'll be coming out in a couple weeks. Ultima we brew in a couple weeks and then released about a week after that. It's actually the perfect New Year's beer. I've always said we should market that as our best December beer.
Not to be confused with the Champagne of beer, which is a trademark of the Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
I was going to, at some point, have our Alex Schultz that does our marketing and design. I was going to have him do a page completely ripping off that, but I don't.
Got to be very careful when you do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, then. I think we have talked about IPAs thoroughly over the last.
We've talked about
episodes.
3 of the 19 plus. Yeah, we're good.
I'm sure there's still a lot more to talk about.
Yeah.
That wraps up this episode of Respecting the Beer. Make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player so you'll never miss an episode. And feel free to join the Facebook group to get updates between the episodes and support the show over on Patreon. Links to both of these are in the show notes. And until next time, remember to respect the beer.